That said, it's clear that the younger working class are now much more local in their speech than their counterparts on the other side of town. The upper-class teenagers are obviously aware that they will be leaving town, first for college, then later for careers, often far from Anniston, from Alabama, and from the South. In the oldest generation, the ones born in the 1880s and 1890s, there was ample opportunity locally for young professionals, lawyers, doctors, bankers, and for executives. All the industries were locally owned, so wealth stayed in the town, and the owners of the industries passed control from one generation to the next, keeping it in the family. Those Anniston industries used Anniston lawyers and accountants. Now, as in the rest of the U.S., local industries and banks have been bought out by regional or national companies. Because of that, children of the former owners and managers can no longer count on local employment. By the same token, the regional and national companies that took over local businesses don't necessarily employ local lawyers or accountants. This is producing a brain drain from smaller towns and cities to larger places such as Birmingham, Atlanta, and New York. Meanwhile, at least up until recently, the working class could find jobs locally, so they've been able to stay in the area, often marrying into other local families. These larger socioeconomic pressures mean that the local upper class tends to accommodate culturally and linguistically to national pressures, to the national prestige variety, while the working class does not. To the contrary, working class speakers align themselves with the very southern culture of country music, stock car racing, and hunting, and with speech that could be called the local covert prestige variety. This may explain why the two varieties are diverging as much as they are. While the oldest generation certainly did not have quite the same phonology, certainly not with R, nor with long I before voiceless consonants, in other regards, the two sides of town shared a number of features, such as drawling, on-gliding U, and the glided long open O. But this is no longer the case. One of the amusements for teenagers is to drive around town, of course. This includes exploring the more elegant section of town, where some of the houses could function as small hotels clinging to the side of the mountain with lovely views over the valleys. A number of the working class people I interviewed commented, some bitterly, on the discrepancy between the standard of living on either side of town. I had thought that the question of race or ethnicity would be a much more ticklish subject, but apparently the contrast between the two sides of town is also a source of deeply held resentments, even hostility. As a result, self-identification is a strong motivation which is maintaining and extending a distinction in the speech between the two sides of town, even among the sides of Anniston. This, in some ways, is reminiscent of what Tony Croft found in his exploration of the speech of the upper class of Philadelphia. This self-identification is reinforced in Anniston by the economic push for the upper class to leave town and the area. This can be seen rather dramatically in my own sample of local speakers. In 1990, I tried to locate all of the speakers who were teenagers in the early 1970s for possible re-interviews. Out of 12 upper-class teenage speakers from that era, all but 2 had left for good. The reverse was the case for the working class. Nearly all of them were still living in the Anniston area. I have to admit that I found this surprising, though on reflection I can see that it's not too different from the trend across the country of smaller places losing the younger generation, especially the more educated young people, to the metropolises, a movement noted by Guy Bailey and his colleagues in various papers in regard to urbanization in Texas and Oklahoma. This is simply the Alabama version of a regional and nationwide story.
We have a minute or two for questions.
Murphy, is there any historical regional background to the class distinction? We notice that when southern things come up in Indiana, and you get to places like Muncie and so forth, class is very much related to origin. So the upper middle class in the middle of Indiana are people who came across from Pennsylvania and Ohio, and working class people are all people who wait to across the falls of the Ohio River and came up from the south. And it just strikes me that a lot of people who came into mining and so forth in northern Alabama and came a little further down are many people who still constitute the working class. So the long-eyed gliding stuff before voiceless consonants, although constituted here as class and realized as class, could possibly have some historical regional background. That is, your upper class speakers might have been longer-term Southerners in some sense. Is that possible?
Actually, I was thinking about this, and there's nobody included in this paper. I think I'm going to do something about that anyway. But to give you the short answer, Anniston, again, it just hit me. It's an example of a new city. It was founded in, I think, let's say, 1875. I don't have the exact date. And it was founded by a northern industrialist. He ponied up the money, and an English ironmonger. And they developed the iron industry there. That was the basic industry. And the workers were people from the countryside who came in. And the educated people who came in to be the bankers, the doctors, and everything, obviously, even though their families had been ruined by the war between the states, they were educated people. And they had been to, say, the University of Alabama. They had medical school in Philadelphia. One was a banker who had come up from Columbus, Georgia. They were the Arliss, say, old plantation type speech, which was the source of the wealth. So there were two sources of the population, and that just hit me as an interesting topic. So does that give you the quick answer?
Yeah, it me too.
Well, that's about all the time we have. Thank you, Corky, for a